The tension in the House Judiciary Committee room was electric. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium, her voice cutting through the marble halls of Congress like a sword of truth. She was in the middle of exposing what she called the biggest cover-up in modern American politics. When suddenly, Senator Lindsey Graham burst through the committee room doors. "Excuse me, Congresswoman," Graham interrupted, his South Carolina drawl dripping with condescension. "I think you've said quite enough." The room went dead silent. Every camera turned toward the unexpected confrontation. What happened in the next 30 seconds would not only shock everyone in that room, but would also send shockwaves across the entire nation. Crockett slowly turned toward Graham, her eyes blazing with a fire that made seasoned politicians take notice. What she said next didn't just freeze the room. It changed everything. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of these explosive political moments that are reshaping America. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The confrontation that was about to unfold would prove that sometimes the most powerful moments in politics happen when someone refuses to back down, even when facing one of the most influential senators in Washington. To understand the magnitude of what was about to happen, you need to know exactly who these two political powerhouses are and why this moment was so explosive. Senator Lindsey Graham isn't just any politician. He's been a fixture in Washington for over 2 decades. The 68-year-old South Carolina Republican has served in the Senate since 2003, and before that, spent 8 years in the House. He's been through multiple presidential administrations, survived countless political battles, and earned a reputation as someone who doesn't back down from a fight. Graham has always been known for his sharp tongue and his ability to dominate any room he enters. As a senior member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he's grilled Supreme Court nominees, investigated presidents, and never hesitated to interrupt proceedings when he felt it was necessary. His colleagues know him as someone who plays hardball, politics, and expects others to fall in line. On this particular day, Graham had rushed over from the Senate side of the Capitol after hearing reports about what Crockett was saying in the House committee hearing. Sources later told reporters that Graham was furious about the direction of the hearing and felt that someone needed to put a stop to the circus. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett represents everything that the old guard of Washington fears. She's young, fearless, and absolutely refuses to play by the traditional rules of political decorum. At just 42 years old, the Texas Democrat has only been in Congress since 2023, but she's already made waves that have reached every corner of the political establishment. Before coming to Congress, Crockett was a civil rights attorney who never lost a case that mattered. She built her reputation by taking on powerful interests and winning. Her legal background gave her something that many politicians lack: the ability to present evidence methodically and devastatingly. Crockett grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, in a working-class family where her grandmother taught her that truth isn't afraid of scrutiny. That lesson would prove crucial on this day. She worked her way through law school, built a successful practice, and then decided to run for Congress because she was tired of watching politicians talk about problems without actually solving them. What made Crockett particularly dangerous to the establishment was her combination of legal expertise and social media savvy. She understood how to make complex political issues understandable to regular Americans, and she wasn't afraid to call out hypocrisy wherever she found it. The committee hearing where this confrontation took place wasn't just another routine political proceeding. Crockett had been presenting evidence about what she called a systematic pattern of corruption that allegedly reached into the highest levels of government. She had spent months gathering documents, interviewing witnesses, and building a case that she claimed would expose the truth that powerful people have been trying to hide. For weeks leading up to this hearing, there had been rumors swirling around Washington that Crockett had obtained information that could be devastating to several high-profile political figures. The establishment was nervous, and Graham's unexpected appearance in the House committee room proved just how nervous they were. This wasn't just about partisan politics. It was about whether a freshman congresswoman could take on the entire Washington establishment and win. The old guard was about to test whether they could still intimidate someone who refused to be intimidated. The moment Graham entered the room, the entire dynamic shifted. Committee members who had been listening intently to Crockett's presentation suddenly looked uncomfortable. Cameras that had been focused on Crockett now split their attention between her and the unexpected visitor. Graham didn't wait for permission to speak. He strode into the room with the confidence of someone who had been doing this for decades, his voice booming across the chamber. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, his tone mixing false politeness with barely concealed irritation. "I've been listening to your presentation from my office, and I think there are some serious procedural issues we need to address here." The committee chairman, clearly caught off guard by Graham's presence, started to speak, but Graham continued without pause. "What we're witnessing here is a freshman member of the House making wild accusations without proper evidence, without proper procedure, and frankly, without proper respect for the institutions that make this democracy work." Crockett remained at the podium, her hands steady on the lectern, her expression calm but alert. She had dealt with intimidation tactics before, and she wasn't about to let Graham derail what she had spent months preparing. Graham positioned himself directly in Crockett's line of sight, a classic power move designed to throw her off balance. "Senator Graham," the committee chairman finally managed to interject. "This is a House committee hearing. I'm not sure what authority you have to. I have the authority of someone who has been in this building longer than some of these members have." "Been alive," Graham shot back. "And I have the responsibility to ensure that serious accusations aren't made lightly." He turned back to Crockett, his eyes narrowing. "Congresswoman, you're playing with fire here. The implications of what you're suggesting, well, let's just say that words have consequences in this town." The tension in the room was palpable. Several committee members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The gallery, packed with reporters and observers, fell completely silent. Even the normally chattering staff members stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation unfold. But Crockett didn't flinch. Instead, she did something that surprised everyone in the room. She smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile that civil rights attorneys wear when they know they have an airtight case. "Senator Graham," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I appreciate your concern about procedure, but I have to ask, where was this concern about proper procedure when your colleagues were making accusations without evidence for the past several years?" The room stirred. A few committee members exchanged glances. Graham's jaw tightened. "That's different, and you know it," Graham responded, his voice rising slightly. "We're talking about national security here. We're talking about the integrity of our institutions." "Exactly," Crockett replied, her voice gaining strength. "We are talking about the integrity of our institutions, which is why I'm here today with documents, with evidence, with facts." Graham took a step closer to the podium, a move that would have intimidated most politicians. "Congresswoman, I've been in this business long enough to know when someone is in over their head. You're a talented young woman, but you're playing in a league that you don't understand." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. Several people in the gallery gasped audibly. Even seasoned political observers later said they had never seen such a blatant attempt to intimidate a sitting member of Congress. "You have a choice here," Graham continued, his voice dropping to what observers later described as a threatening whisper that somehow carried across the entire room. "You can end this charade now, apologize for wasting everyone's time, and we can all move on, or you can continue down this path and face the consequences." The committee chairman looked like he wanted to intervene, but seemed frozen by the unprecedented nature of what was happening. House rules didn't exactly cover what to do when a senator barged into a committee hearing to intimidate a witness. Crockett stood silent for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. The entire room held its breath. Graham stood with his arms crossed, clearly expecting her to back down like so many others had before her. But those 10 seconds weren't filled with fear or uncertainty. Later interviews revealed that Crockett was actually taking a moment to decide not whether to respond, but how devastating her response should be. She looked directly at Graham, then slowly scanned the room, making eye contact with committee members, with the cameras, and with the packed gallery. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, clear, and absolutely fearless. "Senator Graham," she began, and everyone in the room leaned forward, sensing that something significant was about to happen. What happened next would go down in congressional history as one of the most devastating political moments ever captured on camera. Crockett didn't just respond to Graham's intimidation. She completely dismantled it with a precision that would have made her law school professors proud. "Senator Graham," Crockett said, her voice carrying across the now silent room, "I want to thank you for joining us today. Your timing is actually perfect because what I'm about to present involves you directly." The blood drained from Graham's face. He had clearly expected Crockett to back down, not double down. The confidence that had carried him into the room suddenly seemed to evaporate. "You see," Crockett continued, reaching for a folder that had been sitting on the podium throughout the entire confrontation. "When I said I had evidence of a systematic pattern of corruption, I wasn't speaking hypothetically." She opened the folder with deliberate precision, her movements calculated and calm. "And when you walked into this room to intimidate me, you actually provided the perfect example of exactly what I've been investigating." Crockett pulled out a series of documents and held them up for the room to see. "These are phone records. Senator Graham, your phone records from the past 6 months. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Graham's mouth fell open, but no words came out. "These records show a pattern of calls between your office and several lobbying firms immediately before key votes in the Senate. But that's not the interesting part." Crockett's voice remained steady, professional, almost conversational. "The interesting part is the timing of the payments these lobbying firms made to organizations that just happened to benefit your political campaigns." Graham finally found his voice. "Those are private communications, and I don't know how you obtained them, but I obtained them through proper legal channels, Senator. The same channels that any competent attorney would use." Crockett's interruption was swift and precise. "But let me show you something even more interesting." She pulled out another document. "This is a text message from your chief of staff to a lobbyist sent 3 days ago. Would you like me to read it to the committee?" Graham was visibly sweating now. "Congresswoman, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but it's not a game, Senator. It says, and I quote, 'The boss is worried about the Crockett hearing. She's gotten too close to the truth. We need to shut this down before she connects all the dots.'" The silence in the room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. Committee members sat with their mouths open. The gallery was frozen in shock. And then Crockett continued, her voice gaining power with each word. 12 hours after that text was sent, you showed up here to try to intimidate me into stopping my investigation." Graham tried to speak, but Crockett wasn't finished. "But here's what you didn't know, Senator. I already connected all the dots. And your attempt to intimidate me just became Exhibit A in what I'm calling the largest corruption investigation in modern congressional history." What Crockett said next was the moment that truly froze the room. She looked directly at Graham, her voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow made her words even more devastating. "Senator Graham, you asked me if I understand what league I'm playing in. Let me answer that question. I'm playing in the league where facts matter, where evidence matters, and where no one, not even a senior senator, is above the law." Isai paused, letting the words sink in. "You said I have a choice to make. You're right. And I choose truth. I choose transparency. And I choose to continue this investigation until every American knows exactly how their government has been corrupted by people who think their power makes them untouchable." The room remained absolutely silent. Graham stood frozen, his face pale, his earlier confidence completely shattered, but Crockett wasn't done. She reached into her folder one more time and pulled out what appeared to be a thick manila envelope. "Oh, and Senator Graham, since you're here, I should probably inform you that this envelope contains evidence that the FBI requested I turn over to them after this hearing concludes. Evidence that suggests your pattern of behavior might have crossed from unethical into criminal. Graham's legs seemed to give out slightly. He grabbed onto a nearby chair for support. So when you asked me if I understand the consequences of my words, let me assure you, I do. But I don't think you understand the consequences of your actions. The committee chairman finally found his voice. Congresswoman Crockett, are you saying that Senator Graham is under federal investigation? Crockett smiled, that same calm, confident smile that had first appeared when Graham entered the room. I'm saying that, as of approximately 1 hour ago, he is. The explosion of sound that followed was unlike anything anyone in that room had ever heard in a congressional hearing. Reporters were shouting questions, committee members were talking over each other, and the gallery erupted in a mixture of gasps, cheers, and complete chaos. Graham stood in the middle of it all, looking like a man who had just watched his entire world collapse in real time. The senator who had entered the room with such confidence and authority was now backing toward the door, his face ashen, his hands trembling. I need to, Graham stammered, but he couldn't finish the sentence. He turned and walked quickly toward the exit, his staff scrambling to follow him. As Graham reached the door, Crockett called out one final time, Senator Graham, before you go, you should know that everything you said in this room today was recorded and will be part of the federal investigation. Graham paused at the doorway, his hand on the handle, but he didn't turn around. After a moment that felt like an eternity, he pushed through the door and disappeared from view. The room remained in chaos for several more minutes until the committee chairman finally called for a recess. But the damage was done. In the span of less than an hour, a freshman congresswoman had not only stood up to one of the most powerful senators in Washington, but had completely destroyed his attempt at intimidation. As the committee room slowly cleared, reporters were already filing stories on their phones. The hashtags, "Are Crockett vs. Graham" and "Corruption Exposed," began trending within minutes. Video clips of the confrontation were being shared thousands of times across social media platforms. Political analysts later said that what they had just witnessed was the most dramatic reversal of power they had ever seen in a congressional hearing. A freshman representative had not only refused to be intimidated by a senior senator, but had turned his intimidation attempt into evidence against him. But the real impact was just beginning to be felt. Within hours, Graham's office would be flooded with requests for comment. Other members of Congress would be asking themselves what evidence Crockett might have about their own activities. And the FBI investigation that Crockett had mentioned would begin making headlines across the nation. Within 30 minutes of Graham's humiliating exit from the committee room, the video of the confrontation was trending on every major social media platform. The hashtag, #Crockett Destroys Graham, became the #1 trend on Twitter, accumulating over 2 million tweets in the first hour alone. The most shared clip was the moment when Crockett revealed the FBI investigation, with Graham's shocked face providing the perfect reaction shot. Memes began appearing almost immediately, with one showing Graham's confident entrance and devastated exit, captioned, "How it started versus how it ended." Major news networks scrambled to get the story on air. CNN interrupted their regular programming with a breaking news alert. MSNBC brought in constitutional law experts to discuss the implications. Even Fox News, despite their typical reluctance to cover stories that made Republicans look bad, couldn't ignore the magnitude of what had happened. The Washington Post's headline read, "Freshman Rep Exposes Senior Senator in Stunning Committee Confrontation." The New York Times went with, "When Intimidation Backfires, How Jasmine Crockett Turned the Tables on Lindsey Graham." As the story exploded across the media landscape, Graham's office went into full crisis mode. His communications director issued a hastily written statement that only made things worse. Senator Graham was simply exercising his constitutional duty to ensure proper congressional procedures. Any suggestion of impropriety is completely unfounded and politically motivated. But the statement fell flat because it completely ignored the evidence that Crockett had presented. Legal experts pointed out that denying impropriety wasn't the same as denying the specific allegations of corruption. Graham himself remained silent for the first several hours after the confrontation, leading to speculation that his lawyers had advised him not to make any public statements. When he finally appeared on a friendly radio show the next morning, his usual commanding presence was nowhere to be found. "Look, this is all a witch hunt," Graham said, his voice lacking its typical confidence. "Jasmine Crockett is a radical who will say anything to get attention. None of these allegations have any merit." But even his allies noticed that Graham never specifically denied the phone records or the text messages that Crockett had referenced. Political observers noted that for someone known for his aggressive defense of himself, Graham seemed unusually defensive and evasive. The most damaging development came when the FBI confirmed that they were indeed investigating Graham and several other members of Congress. A carefully worded statement from the Bureau said they were examining potential violations of federal corruption statutes by multiple elected officials. This confirmation turned what could have been dismissed as political theater into a serious legal matter. Suddenly, Graham's attempt to intimidate Crockett looked less like political hardball and more like obstruction of justice. Legal experts began appearing on every news show to explain the potential charges Graham could face. Former federal prosecutors pointed out that attempting to shut down a congressional investigation that was feeding information to the FBI could constitute witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy charges. The impact of Crockett's revelations extended far beyond Graham himself. Other members of Congress who had received similar phone calls from lobbyists began lawyering up. Several high-profile politicians canceled scheduled appearances, claiming scheduling conflicts. The lobbying firms mentioned in Crockett's evidence saw their stock prices plummet as investors worried about potential criminal liability. 3 major K Street lobbying shops announced they were conducting internal reviews of their practices. Campaign. Finance watchdog groups immediately filed ethics complaints against Graham and demanded investigations into other members of Congress. Common Cause announced they were launching their own investigation into what they called the Graham Corruption Network. While Graham was dealing with the fallout, Crockett found herself catapulted to national prominence. Requests for interviews poured into her office from every major news outlet. Speaking invitations arrived from universities, civic organizations, and political groups across the country. But Crockett handled her newfound fame with the same strategic thinking she had displayed in the committee room. Instead of doing a media blitz, she carefully selected a few high-profile interviews where she could control the narrative. Her appearance on 60 Minutes 3 days after the confrontation drew the show's highest ratings in 2 years. When asked how she had obtained the evidence against Graham, Crockett smiled and said, "When you're investigating corruption, sometimes the corruption comes to you." The interview revealed that Crockett had been building her case for months, working with whistleblowers, former staffers, and investigative journalists. The confrontation with Graham hadn't been an accident. It had been the culmination of a carefully planned investigation. Political scientists and historians began calling the Crockett-Graham confrontation a watershed moment in American politics. For the first time in decades, a freshman member of Congress had successfully challenged the seniority system that typically protected senior members from accountability. Dr. Sarah Chen, a political science professor at Georgetown University, told CNN, "What Jasmine Crockett did was demonstrate that, in the age of social media and citizen journalism, the old rules of political intimidation no longer apply. You can't just silence someone by pulling rank anymore." The confrontation also highlighted the growing generational divide in American politics. Crockett, at 42, represented a new generation of politicians who weren't willing to accept "that's how things have always been done" as an answer to corruption and abuse of power. Young voters, in particular, embraced Crockett as a symbol of the change they wanted to see in politics. College campuses across the country organized Crockett clubs, dedicated to government transparency and anti-corruption activism. As the FBI investigation expanded, more details began to emerge about the scope of the alleged corruption. Sources close to the investigation told reporters that the probe involved not just Graham, but potentially dozens of members of Congress from both parties. The investigation revealed a sophisticated network of lobbyists, campaign donors, and elected officials who had allegedly been trading votes for financial benefits. Phone records, email communications, and financial documents painted a picture of systemic corruption that went far beyond any individual politician. Crockett's role in exposing the network earned her both praise and criticism. Supporters called her a hero for exposing corruption. Critics accused her of grandstanding and damaging faith in democratic institutions. As the scandal continued to unfold, questions arose about Graham's political future. South Carolina newspapers began running editorials calling for his resignation. His approval ratings in his home state plummeted to historic lows. Several potential Republican primary challengers announced they were considering runs against Graham in his next election. The senator, who had once been considered a shoo-in for re-election, was suddenly facing the possibility that his political career might be over. Former allies began distancing themselves from Graham. Several senators who had previously considered him a close friend suddenly became unavailable for comment when reporters asked about the allegations. The Crockett-Graham confrontation led to immediate changes in how Congress operated. House leadership announced new rules requiring full disclosure of all communications between members and registered lobbyists. The Senate began considering similar measures. Ethics committees in both chambers announced they were reviewing their procedures for investigating corruption allegations. Several long-standing practices that had previously been considered normal were suddenly under scrutiny. The confrontation also led to a broader conversation about power dynamics in Congress. Freshman members reported feeling more empowered to speak up about issues they had previously been afraid to address. Despite her newfound fame, Crockett remained focused on her original mission of exposing corruption and fighting for transparency in government. She used her platform to push for comprehensive campaign finance reform and stronger ethics enforcement. Her committee presentations became must-see TV in Washington, with other members of Congress wondering if they might be the next target of her investigations. Lobbyists began approaching members more carefully, knowing that their communications might end up as evidence in a future hearing. Crockett also became a mentor to other young politicians who wanted to challenge the status quo. She began holding regular workshops on investigative techniques and strategic communication for freshman members of Congress. As this story continues to unfold, the FBI investigation that Crockett revealed has expanded to include multiple grand juries and dozens of potential defendants. What started as one congresswoman's investigation into government corruption has become one of the largest political scandals in modern American history. The ultimate outcome remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: the confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Lindsey Graham changed American politics forever. It proved that courage, preparation, and strategic thinking could triumph over intimidation and institutional power. The story of Jasmine Crockett and Lindsey Graham is ultimately a story about the power of truth in American democracy. It shows that when someone is willing to stand up for what's right, even the most powerful people in Washington can be held accountable. For young Americans watching from home, Crockett's example demonstrated that change is possible, that corruption can be exposed, and that courage can triumph over intimidation. Her message was simple but powerful. Democracy works when citizens demand that it works. The confrontation also served as a reminder that in America, no one is above the law, not senators, not representatives, and not anyone else who thinks their power makes them untouchable. As investigations continue and more details emerge, the full impact of what happened in that committee room is still being felt. But one thing is already clear: Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a political confrontation. She helped restore faith in the idea that in America, truth and justice can still prevail. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these incredible moments when courage meets corruption and truth wins the day. The next chapter of this story is still being written, and you won't want to miss how it ends. What do you think will happen next? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure to share this story with anyone who believes that our democracy is worth fighting for.